Hi friends! Before we start, I have a quick disclaimer. This video is by no means meant to be a tutorial. If you would like to fold the model, I've linked the book below. It is extremely important to respect and protect designers and diagrammers, as illegal book copies and tutorials are rampant on the internet. Without further ado, let's start the video. Alright guys, so as you can see, today's challenge is the Styracosaurus by Kamiya Satoshi. Now, what you're seeing here really quick is just me pre-creasing the model. Speeding this up pretty quick because I don't think it's that interesting, but perhaps you guys like enjoying, just folding and unfolding. This model doesn't have a ton of pre-creasing, so it's kind of enjoyable in that aspect. But yeah, one key thing I was trying to do, however, was not crease too hard. Kami is kind of a weak paper in my opinion, and if you use like a nail crease or like an over crease, then oftentimes you can cause the paper to tear. So this next part, you're gonna see me use a technique of free folding to get some of these creases. Now to get precise creases, you can notice I use my nail to kind of start the point, and then I form the crease after I get 2 points of creases in. You'll watch me do this technique pretty often, but yeah, throughout this time-lapse part of it, I'm going to commentate over whether that's different techniques, or I'll just kind of explain my thought process with Kami, and you'll see that reflected as parts of the time-lapse will be really fast and others will be slowed down. I tried to slow down some more interesting parts, like this pre-crease section right here where I do some rabbit ears and just bisect some angles for pre-creasing. But other than that, enjoy a lot of the time-lapse. I tried to slow it down enough so you guys can see what's happening. You can kind of see what folds I'm doing instead of all of it being a blur. But now you can see pretty much all the pre-creasing's done. And you're gonna watch the collapse portion and the model start to take shape. Something I'm doing right here is, since the model's starting to fold in and you're folding or creasing over 2 levels, I'm being very careful to be precise about it. Kami's a little bit thicker of a paper, so you have some errors and mismatch when you just try to fold like the diagram says to. So I'm paying attention here to make sure that all the creases are aligned, taking into account the thickness of the Kami. This problem, however, will cause I guess impreciseness in some of your folds. It kind of naturally happens, but the way you deal with it is how you can restore precision, and ultimately if you can understand what part of the model you're folding, you can kind of gauge how precise you need to be. So for example, that part there was just for the tail. So while I wanted to be fairly precise about it, if it was slightly off or slightly mismatched, which you might be able to see here, it doesn't matter too much in the long terms. I'll explain parts where I want it to be extra precise. That'll be things like the horns or parts that I know are going to be very small. And in those I'll take care to maintain precision. Now this next part in the instructions was quite interesting. I kind of wanted to just collapse it, but the instructions has a folding sequence, so you can see myself like pausing, and that's just me rechecking the instructions to kind of understand what's going on. Normally I want to make sure I'm not confused so that I don't make mistakes. I'll make mistakes later, you'll see that happen, but at least in this portion I just take some time. You always want to make sure you're doing the right folds before actually committing to them, especially if you want a clean result in the final. Kami, as you fold it more and more times, it gets weaker and weaker, so if you can basically one-shot the folds every time and not have to crease over and over again or unfold things, then it's going to be more and more precise. This section I forgot to do a pre-crease, so you're watching me just re-crease it. and then we're starting the process of collapsing, which is kind of some sync folds. I really enjoyed these. Hopefully you can kind of tell what I'm doing here, but you watch me just kind of indent and press in that middle section, and it collapses all down, which is always very, very satisfying to experience as you fold. Alright, so here we have another spot where I just check the instructions one more time, make sure I'm not confused or anything. And then we're about to go into these sync folds here. So yeah, it's kind of nice just watching more and more layers of the model fold down, and from the pre-creasing, it's really satisfying when the pre-creasing kind of collapses all in. So we're going to see that about there, collapse down. And then this section, in the folding sequence, they don't have everything collapse at once. So as you can see, there's some kind of off-edged portions there that then are able to get sync folded. Just like that. And, you know, these things like those steps, sometimes they seem daunting or difficult, but as you can see, I'm doing that fingernail technique where I'm reaching inside the model to get it going the right direction, and then it makes it a lot easier to sync fold. And yeah, there's some layers forming. You can see the general water bomb base, and then normally when you see something like this where a layer folds over, and then this is basically a squash fold into a petal fold, it's kind of a general like folding sequence to get more and more flaps while pre-creasing them all at the same time. I really enjoy it. I thought the steps are gonna have you undo the petal fold right here, but you'll notice it happens later on. I'll probably commentate on that. A lot of times in diagrams it looks confusing when it says like unravel the paper or whatever and arrows point everywhere. So when it gets to that, that's like my favorite kind of folding sequence, so I'll discuss kind of in detail how to do that. But for now, it's doing some more folding sequences on each side of basically that base we formed, and it's going to start forming what you'll notice to be the head portion. So I'll let this portion play out a little bit. Right here there's actually kind of an unsync, and you'll see me pausing a ton because I'm trying to understand which way it works, but over time you'll kind of see it happen. It's not terribly hard, and I really like the sequence. What I was trying there is I initially thought it was like a sync fold, but it was an unsync. So you'll start to see it form, and right about there you just push that in, and when it lies flat it sticks in nicely like so. Those are always little fun challenges to see if your pre-creasing was accurate enough to help you out there. And yeah, the rest of this is just the folding sequence. You'll start to see the structure of the model form pretty quick. That big flap, if you can guess, becomes, I guess, the rest of like the arm, the front foreleg. But yeah, some fun folding sequences here, and I'm just making sure the instructions are being followed properly. That's about it for that side. And then we're starting to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to show the unsync a little bit, or again. I do it a bit faster this time just because I know what's going on. So you'll see that about here. So this time I know which way it's supposed to fold, so I kind of get it just like that. And oftentimes when you're folding and there's like a repeated side, you'll be able to do it a lot faster just because you basically know what all the steps are. Sometimes you forget, but that's what the diagram's for. Alright, so This is sped up pretty fast, so you might not really tell what's going on, but it's basically the same thing as what you saw on the other side. Basically just reverse folds and creasing. A lot of flap creation can just be done by reverse folds along the edge. Alright, so we got the other side done, and you can start to see, if you know what the Styracosaurus looks like, that those are the legs, there's the mouth and kind of facial area, and then you can kind of see where the horns are going to come from, and the crest on its head, that big bone piece. And now this portion is getting the rest of those horns created. So again, a lot of it's just like some reverse folds, some sync folds. This part gets a little bit smaller, but as you can see, I am not fully folding the paper on the table. I'm kind of holding the model in my hands and gently creasing using my fingernails and my thumbs just to indent first before creasing. Now, I don't know if this is the correct term for it, but whenever you're folding without like creasing the model on the table, I call that like free folding, because it's in the air, and it's a really good kind of technique to practice. It feels kind of unnatural when you start, just because you're used to creasing something flat on the table, but this part is like the horns and it's getting really thick. So if you were to crease on the table, that's where you would be prone to starting to tear the paper or wear out the paper, where it'll tear in portions later. So that's the reason why I'm just holding it in my hands and not like pressing anything flat super hard. Overall, that will help in the end. While the angle kind of just shows the top, it's you might be able to see that it's pretty thick along the top area. This portion is the tail. Now here you'll see me mess up. There's a cool sync fold there, but basically when I was reading the instructions, I got carried away a little bit, thinking that I knew the fold that was supposed to happen. So these diagonal folds here, I kind of fully commit to them without checking, and I start to run into questions. You'll see me pause quite a bit because the corners weren't really lining up, and I was thinking it was kind of weird that it would force imprecision, but really it was because I just did the step wrong. So I actually go a fair distance, and here's me fixing it. It took me about 20 minutes, and then I finally fixed it and got the tail to line up. You can normally start to tell when you're going off when all the reference points that the diagrams give you start to change from what your model is, but right about there I got it all corrected, so that's good. Alright, this next part is pretty fun. Before I folded it, I kind of looked ahead to see what was going on, but basically there's this small little squash fold, and originally I was kind of worried about it because I wasn't sure how tiny it was going to be, but that was a fair size squash fold, so no worries there. But I always love where you kind of squash bases and it either elongates a flat or it creates a cool shape. So in this case it kind of did both, and whenever I see that happen, I like to try to find ways to use it in my own design. Alright, here we have this part. This is my favorite folding sequence. So you unfold, and you want to maintain the base, but that fold right there, you pop over, and your creases will be in line to re-crease into this shape. And basically you're getting a smaller water bomb right next to it. Some designs have it push into like a crane base, but in this case we're just using the water bomb for a different purpose, and the folding sequence continues from there. But yeah, there's a ton of models with that in there. If you ever get confused, that's what it looks like. here's a little sink fold. That's probably the smallest sink fold you have to do, so really this model isn't too difficult. In general, Kami, there's going to be various things you run into like this. This is a squash fold, but part of the paper is catching, so instead of just forcing the squash fold, while you know it might work if you just force it, I wanted to be precise. So you'll see me kind of lift up the paper and almost pre-crease with a squash fold just at the points right here. That way you can, you know, get that precise squash fold, and the more precision the better. But if that's something you're not interested in, or if it's not, you know, visible when you finish a model, doesn't quite matter, but I always recommend being precise. Alright, so I'm gonna do some just mountain folds and valley folds. Here I start to once again find that the model doesn't look like the diagram, and I realized I messed up. So in the diagram there's always like, oh, do steps like 23 to 50 on the other side. This one had it on the other side and the back 4 layers, so I missed the back layers on both the right and left side. So that's what you're seeing here. Now thankfully I didn't go too far in terms that I wouldn't be able to do that, so I was able to fix it without any difficulties and continue from there. The rest of the model made on the other side made a bit more sense with that part complete, as it made the front and back layers symmetrical. Alright, so there's some detailing on the head. It's really starting to take shape. We used the squash fold previously to start to get some details on the nose, and here you see me starting to shape out the horns a little bit. This is all part of the diagram. Normally if I was folding I'd probably do these last, but I think they just have it set in tone so you kind of can see where your model's going. And at least in the diagram there's some fancy little tricks under some of the layers to precisely get those horns basically as long as you can while folding them out. So it's a really efficient way without having like really long flaps taking up a lot of paper, but still having long enough flaps to achieve the look. So I really appreciate that about this model. I thought that was very cool. Yeah, you might not be able to tell, but you kind of squash fold some layers in, and it allows you to stretch them out a little bit further. But there's the other side, and I don't quite shape them yet. While they look thin, I'm actually going to thin them out and curl them at the end. And the rest of it is just starting to take shape. As you can see, this part goes pretty fast, but I let the head stay raised. I realized that since it's thick, it's probably the most likely area to tear, so I really try not to mess with it as I'm folding everything else. You don't really have to touch it, but in the diagram it kind of shows that you just fold the whole model in half, and to avoid any thickness errors I just left it hanging up like that throughout the rest of the fold. And once again, here's some leg folding, and I'm not really folding on the table. Most of it is just in my hand creasing these things, especially since the model is pretty much three-dimensional now, as you can see there. That's basically what we got going. Alright, now I'm speeding this up a ton because I don't think it's very interesting, but it's just the rest of the legs. And we'll get into how I shaped this model pretty soon. We're almost done folding it. So there's essentially the folded model according to the diagram. I haven't done any shaping yet, but it's basically complete. It for sure won't stand up. That's one thing. Kami's not very resistive, so it splays out like that. So here's some of my shaping materials. Pretty general. I'm not using methyl cellulose because any water-based thing on Kami is gonna cause it either to tear, warp, or discolor. And that'd be fine if you were painting the model, but I'm not painting it, so I'm just using some white glue on its own to shape. It works out pretty well, really cheap, accessible. Here I'm gluing some layers like this on the tail. Basically, if I want the tail to look sharp, then I don't want those flaps popping up. So I'm just gluing that down. I'll let it dry, and basically any other like layer that's lifting, I'm going to put glue in. I'm also going to put glue on the inside just to maintain structural integrity and start to make the paper more resistive, so it'll be more likely to stand up on its own. I know some people don't like to use glue, but I'm planning on traveling and displaying these models, which is why I'm using glue to make it more durable. I used to never use glue, but once I started traveling, and it takes a toll on the models, so I find glue to be a nice way to preserve my origami, and also it's good for shaping. So I use a mix of clips and paper clips. The metal clips, they kind of bite, so if there's a section where it needs to be held on the outside, I use the paper clips. Alright, so I'm letting it dry. You can't quite see, but there's little gaps where it's like 20 minutes period for the glue to dry. That way I can keep shaping it. The back legs kind of causing issues. I was shaping it there, and then I was trying to get like a spine on the back. So you can start to see here that once the tail fully dried, I'm going to make it three-dimensional by essentially creasing a spine into it like that. Now, one tactic I learned from an advanced art class I took in high school was like, if you're drawing something, you want to kind of be looking at something visual to model off of it. While you can be like very creative in your own head, to make something realistic, you want to be looking at something and draw the lines of the object, not what your brain perceives the object is supposed to look like. So that's what I'm doing here. I found a picture on Google of a Styracosaurus, and I'm basically just trying to mimic the head angle and body portions to give it a little bit more life. Now I choose to tilt the head the other direction, so it's not exactly gonna look like the photo, but it kind of gives some inspiration as to proportions in legs and the neck that just looking at like Kamiya's fold of the Styracosaurus won't really show. Alright, so you can see some of the face details here. I creased up the horns and started to curl them a little bit. I didn't show that, but basically you just fold them in half very carefully, and if you crease it properly just on once, then it should stay like that. Otherwise you can use some glue to, not a lot on the horns, but a little bit to keep it like that. Alright, so now I'm just breathing some more life into the model, adding some details, just small little curls, curves, and whatever else I can add to the face. I kind of wanted to carve in the bone structure that the picture had, just using my hands, but I decided that it might start to discolor the Kami. So as you can see, I just kind of use my index finger and make an impression into the top of the head. Yeah, and most of the shaping's pretty much done. It just doesn't stand up yet, so I'll show how I kind of fix that. A lot of it, what has to do is the angle of the legs and if they're unequal distance. So here I have some gold foil seal. It's like for gold leafing, but you're supposed to put sealer on porous objects if you're going to gold leaf on them. And what I learned is that it kind of dries up like a plastic, and like it's not really hardening the paper, but it's making it a little stronger. So I decided trying to use it on the model just to protect it a little bit, protect the paper. Otherwise the legs would kind of give out and add creases. It's a little bit more effective than glue, but if all else, just slather on some glue on the inside of the legs and it'll stand up. And here we are, all done. So everything dried, it stands up properly on all 4 legs. It kind of has a motion stance. You can't really see it from how I'm holding here, but you can definitely tell the model is very 3-dimensional. And I was able to achieve a lot of the details I wanted. A nice body pose and very clean elements of the paper. I like the red finish on the Kami, and yeah. So that's all for folding. And basically now you can just enjoy a nice demo and enjoy some of the details I was able to add into the model. Hopefully you guys enjoyed some of this commentary and got a slight idea on how I achieved all of this with Kami. If you have any questions about Kami, maybe I'll make a formal video on at least shaping with different papers. So whether it's shaping with Kami or shaping with something better. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Enjoy this final little collage, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Put the glimmer in your eyes. Would be sorry if we tried. It's too late. See your face in my reflection, cuts right to the bone.
All this origami, all this origami, all this origami got me going kamikaze now.